friends. I am Michael Kingswood. I write fiction for fun and profit. This is Storytime, where I share my writings, share my thoughts, talk about music, generally do whatever comes to mind since it's fun, with the hope that you will say, hey man, I like that guy. Or if you're sharing his writing, I like that guy's writing. I should probably buy some books. It's a little bit of a mercenary way to go about things, but that's how I'm rolling. And so, hey. On Saturdays, which, today is, we do Story Saturday. I say we do, but we haven't for a few weeks because, frankly, I've been swamped with stuff. And also a little bit of a slacker. And that's here and there. We're doing Story Saturday now. On Tuesdays, we share chapters from my first novel in my heroic fantasy series, which is called Glimmer Vale. And then throughout the rest of the week, we do other things. So this week, we are... I don't have time to fully record the next short story that I was planning to do, so we're going to reach back into the past with Blast of the Past story. One that we covered a few years ago, but hasn't been up here since then. So those of you who are new, or those of you who aren't new but haven't really scrolled back in the past for a while, probably won't remember it too much. Now, this one came from my Stories from the Great Challenge collection, which you can see the huge thickness of it. 52 stories written over the year, several years ago. And this one is a science fiction kind of detective-y kind of thing, and also kind of a making shady deals kind of story. It's called Playing for Scraps, and I think you will like it. I wrote it, I'm reading it, we'll get to it. I was just tallying up the invoice for my latest case, an easy job for a little old lady down on the station's third level, when Jason conned for entrance to my office. I'd known Jason for a couple years, and when he conned, the image of his face popped into the upper left corner of my vision, courtesy of the database implants that I'd installed last year. Made forgetting names and faces a thing of the past, but sometimes it could also be annoying, like now, when I had been busily deciding whether to charge Mrs. Garant for the gratuity I'd had to slip the security guy, or just let it slide. So I tried to ignore Jason's comm. Maybe he'd go away. But he commed a second time a few seconds later. Screw it. I'd let her pass on this one. Swiping the gratuity entry out of the invoice, I made a sweeping downward gesture with my left hand, and the hollow of the invoice file compressed down into the stainless steel top of my desk, and winked out. My office was not what you would call spacious. Just a few meters on a side, barely larger than a closet in some people's homes. But I owned it right out, or as much as anyone could really own anything on a space station that was owned entirely by the government of the Korathi Empire, and I made it my own little slice of, well, not quite heaven, but at least something that worked for me. The desk was directly in front of the door, and L-shaped, so I could swivel my chair to the right to face the little brown and white sofa where clients could sit without exposing myself. It also gave me plenty of legroom, and plenty of room to conceal a couple of pieces on either side of the L, so one was always easy at hand, whichever way I was facing. Just in case. Behind the desk, or to the right if I was facing the couch, I had my file cabinets and a vid screen, and just to the right of those was a little blue sliding door that led to my back room, which had just enough space for a bed sized for one, two if you really like snuggling, and a head compartment that I had modified to include a little shower apparatus in it. I even had a real potted plant in the corner next to the client's couch, which opened flower buds from time to time throughout the year, giving the place a more organic fragrance than the typical aftersense of the atmosphere processors on the engineering levels lent it. It was pretty much everything a guy could need or want, except for maybe a kitchen, but I'd never been a good cook anyway, and Tamarai's place down the corridor had the best chef on the station, so screw it. The latest comm from Jason was still registering on my implants. I keyed up the security camera I had mounted in the corridor above my door. On the vid screen above my file cabinets, live video from outside sprang to life, and I saw Jason standing there, his head swinging left and right as he shifted from foot to foot, noticeably. Either he really needed to use the head, or he was damn nervous about something. Great. Sighing, I slipped my hand beneath my desk to the button that controlled the door's locking mechanism, and turned to face front. The lock snapped open with an audible clack, and outside a quick buzzer would have sounded.
A second later, Jason had the door pushed open and he slipped inside, closing it as soon as he was through. Jason was a little bit taller than me, but skinny. The kind of guy who'd never become acquainted with the weight room, but also had a metabolism that kept him lean. He was lightly tanned, with long, thick black hair and deep brown eyes, and he wore an olive green jumpsuit and mag boots. A black faux leather belt cinched the jumpsuit around his waist, and the thigh pocket of his left leg bulged with something or other. "Hey, Suresh," Jason said, his eyes glancing from me to the couch to the door to my back room and back in a frenetic scan that confirmed it in my mind. He was scared. "Jason," I said, keeping my voice calm and gesturing at the couch for him to sit. "How's the recording coming?" Jason blinked. Then some of his nervous energy faded as my comment changed his thoughts for a second, and he flashed a hint of a smile. He worked up on the cargo docks, but he'd always fancied himself a musician, and he had a side gig playing his keyboard and singing in the various bars and clubs that scattered the station. From what I'd heard, he made all right money doing that, and he had developed a bit of a following. He'd given the station a bit of a stir a couple months back, though, when he launched a campaign to help fund his first privately recorded and distributed album. He'd put up advertisement messages on the various boards, sent out emails to everyone he knew, pimped it at his gigs, said he had the distribution all lined up, just needed the money for recording and production. He'd offered a bunch of perks and goodies for people who contributed, depending on how much they gave. It was the talk of the station for a few weeks. Hell, I'd even contributed a little bit myself, just enough to get the album, not for anything else. I figured, what the hell? He and I weren't exactly friends, but I didn't think ill of him, and he could play the keyboard pretty well, so why not help a brother out? And from what I'd heard, he'd crushed it, brought in far more money than he asked for. Now he just had to produce the thing. Jason sank onto my couch, and the smile he had started to wear slipped away. He slouched forward, resting his elbows on his knees and clasping his hands together. His eyes lowered to look down at his hands, and he shook his head. "Need your help. I need off the station without anyone knowing I've gone." I wasn't entirely surprised he was in trouble, based on how he was acting, but I was surprised by the request. I cocked an eyebrow at him. "Why?" He looked back up at me and blanched when his eyes met mine. "I'm in trouble, man." "No kidding." He flinched slightly at my tone. I didn't even try to hold the sarcasm back, but after a second he shrugged slightly, and his eyes fell again. "I owe some people money. I thought I'd make enough from the album thing to be able to get the album produced and pay them back, and it would be all good, but—" he shook his head. My other eyebrow rose to meet its fellow on my forehead. "You took in about double what you asked for." "Yeah, well, about that." "Oh, for the love of—" I shook my head in disgust. "Why, did you blow it all on strippers and dust?" "What?" He jerked upright, looking at me with an expression like I'd just called his sister a slut. "No!" "So what's the problem?" Jason's nostrils flared. I'd pissed him off by the dust comment, apparently, but at least he wasn't talking in a self-pitying mumble anymore. "The problem is that production costs are more than I thought. I blew through most of the money I got, and the album's only 2/3 done, and I still have to pay for the extras that I offered to the highest tier backers. And then this morning, Carpenter's men told me he wants his money now." "Carpenter? You owe money to Carpenter?" If that were the case, it was bad. Very bad. You didn't mess with Carpenter. Not in Gilroy Station. Hell, not any place within 2 jumps of this system. Jason nodded, some of his anger leaving, as he considered his predicament again, and not my accusation. "How much do you owe him?" $4,000. "But I heard you brought in almost $10,000 from your fundraiser. How much do you have left?" Jason just looked at me, silently. I sat there for a long several moments, considering. He really was in big trouble. It was hard to tell which direction was worse. On the one hand, he had taken a lot of money from people living on the station, making promises to them that he apparently was now not going to be able to deliver on. I'm not a lawyer, but to me that sounded like fraud. On the other hand, he owed Carpenter the equivalent of 4 months' wages for a guy who worked the docks, like Jason did. A man could get thrown in prison for fraud for a long time, but not paying Carpenter? That would get you spaced. Okay, no question which was worse after all. I shook my head. Should have paid him off first. Jason snorted agreement. Then after a second, he shook his head. "No, I was going to pay him soon as the album was out and I started getting royalties. No problem at all." I just looked at him. Even after all that had happened, he couldn't actually be that dumb to continue justifying like this. But maybe he was, because he looked back at me defiantly, like he really thought he'd done nothing wrong. I sighed. "So you want me to smuggle you off the station?" Shaking my head, I said, "What is it you think that I'd do, Jason?" "What do you mean? You're a private dick." I nodded. "Yeah, I do investigation. If I help you run out on your contributors, I'm an accessory to fraud and maybe larceny. I don't do crime. You want crime, you go to Carpenter. You want an honest investigation within the law, Well, not always within the law, to be honest, but close enough for deniability, and he didn't have to hear that right this moment. You come to me. Carpenter? Jason looked taken aback. But I can't. Right, you can't go to him and ask for help getting away from him. I blew my breath out in a soft whistle and leaned back in my chair. Sounds like you're screwed. Jason frowned, his eyelids fluttering in a quick succession of blinks as he processed what I just said. You know what the worst part is? He shook his head. The worst part is I won't get my copy of your album. He blinked, cocked his head to the side. Then he grinned as the import of what I'd said raced as quickly as anything could race through his head. Yeah, I didn't know you backed me. Thanks, man. I just stared at him, narrowing my eyes into the look that I knew from experience made me appear a very dangerous fellow to cross. And not just as an act either. I couldn't believe what he just said. He didn't even know who had backed him? How in the hell could he think he would fulfill... I took in a long, deep breath to calm myself. Held it, then let it out slowly. Jason, meanwhile, had lost his momentary smile. He'd actually recoiled deeper into the couch from the look I'd given him. Right that second, he looked like he wanted nothing more than to bolt out of my office. Too bad for him that my door locked automatically when it shut. I let him squirm for a few seconds as I considered the situation. I could just tell him to get out, and let him take his chances with Carpenter, or with the law. It would serve him right. But you know what? I really did think he played that keyboard well, and I wanted to hear his album. And while he wasn't exactly a friend, I didn't really want him to end up being spaced either, or sent to prison. Though let's be honest, he would never live to go to prison. And maybe I could work a little something for myself into this too. I nodded to myself and stood up from my desk chair. Jason made to get up as well, but I put up a hand and he froze in place. Okay, I said, here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay here. I'm going to go talk to Carpenter. Carpenter? Jason sounded shocked, but shut up. I reached down beneath my desk and pulled out the rightmost of the guns I'd kept concealed there. Jason's eyes widened when he saw it, but when I just lifted up my shirt and tucked the weapon into the holster I always wore on my right hip, he relaxed again. A bit. Okay, I'm going to try to catch you a deal. Probably take an hour or two, but if you're not here when I get back, the deal's off. His eyes flicked from the spot on my hip where the gun was now hidden beneath my shirt to my face, and he nodded. Then his eyes moved to my desk. Was he wondering what else I had stored there? Maybe money? Well, I did have a stash of cash in here, but he'd never find it in its hiding spot, and as for the other gun, the mechanism locking it in place beneath the left side of my desk was key to my DNA and wouldn't unlock for anyone else, so he could muck about with it all day and never get to the piece. Still, it couldn't hurt to lay down the rules plainly for him, since apparently he wasn't all that smart. Don't touch anything while I'm gone. You can watch the televid and use the head. Nothing else. Got it? He nodded again. Okay, I'll be back soon. With that, I headed toward the door and the station beyond. I've worked with Carpenter before. I didn't know if Jason knew that or not, but it didn't matter. No one who does business in my field on Gilroy Station could have avoided crossing paths with Carpenter. In my case, I dealt with him twice before on behalf of clients, and again for a job he wanted done. Mostly above board and not at all unscrupulous. He knows my boundaries and has never even attempted to get me to cross them. So we knew each other. Wouldn't say we were friends, but there was at least a healthy professional respect there. I was counting on that to give me an in to try to help Jason out of his fix, and as I rode up the lift to the first deck, where Carpenter kept his offices, I went over my pitch to him at least 4 times. The first deck was much different than the lower levels where I resided. The corridors were broader, the overheads higher, the LED lighting more closely approximating the natural light from a G5 star. Even the grav plates in the deck seemed more uniform, but maybe that was just an illusion caused by all the other niceties that were so much better here than what I was used to. Carpenter's offices were opulent, as fitted a man of his stature. Officially, he was CEO of the system's largest shipping firm, and had branched out into real estate development and domestic manufacturing. But of course, that was just a front to conceal and assist his real business. Still, as I strode into Carpenter's corporate offices, I couldn't help but feel like I was being warmly welcomed into a peaceful and honest realm of commerce, bent only toward doing its best for the benefit of its clients and shareholders both. But that only lasted a few seconds. Then I began glancing over my shoulder, looking for the knife that was headed toward my back. Or the bullet. Since I was known there, I managed to skirt past the initial layer of receptionists and lackeys, but I couldn't just waltz past Justine, Carpenter's executive assistant. She was mid-40s and still attractive, with lush blonde hair that had to have been dyed to conceal growing gray, rolling past her shoulders, and a shapely figure that didn't at all reflect the 5 children that I knew for a fact she had borne for her husband. As I approached, her sparkling green eyes narrowed, and she smiled at me cautiously, shifting so that the green blouse she wore closed a bit at the collar. Almost like she expected me to try to steal a glimpse or something. "Mr. Amantha," she said by greeting, and arched an eyebrow at me. Sitting there behind the thick mahogany desk that marked her domain, she made no qualms about who was in charge in this place. "I don't believe you have an appointment." I grinned at her, trying for the charming gamut. "Just wanted to see you again." The other eyebrow rose to join the first, and her lips compressed. "So much for the charming bit." I cleared my throat. "I need to see him. It's an urgent matter concerning Jason Ramsey." She just looked at me for a few seconds, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. On the one hand, Carpenter did not like to be disturbed without an appointment. On the other hand, she knew I had done jobs for him in the past, and her eye had twitched slightly when I said Jason's name. She knew Carpenter was interested in him, if not the exact reason why he was. Justine nodded. "One moment." Then her eyes went unfocused. I recognized the expression of a person conducting subvocal comms over implants. She was communicating directly with her boss. A moment later she blinked and her eyes turned back to meet mine. She nodded slightly. "Mr. Carpenter will see you." She gestured toward the wide faux oak double doors to the left of her desk, which led into Carpenter's inner sanctum. Smiling at her, I nodded, then proceeded toward the doors. I saw her left hand drift beneath her desk, and a buzz and a click announced a lock disengaging. Then the door swung open inwardly. Carpenter's office was 5 or 6 times the size of mine, and paneled in what was either very good faux oak or the real thing. Either way, it would have cost a small fortune to bring it up here onto the station. The left-hand wall, as I entered, was dominated by bookshelves that were crammed full of hardback tomes beyond immediate count, yet another indication of the man's wealth, even if the paneling hadn't been enough. His desk was broad and deep, made of darkly stained wood, and faced the doors before a wall of pure, transparent plasteel that looked over the starscape beyond the way a planet-bound executives would look out over a picturesque countryside. A trio of upholstered, stuffed chairs sat around a coffee table that was stained the same shade as Carpenter's desk between the doors and the desk, to the right a bit, a more informal place to meet than in the 2 similarly upholstered chairs sitting directly across his desk and facing it. Carpenter himself was a man who, unlike Jason, had been inside the weight room before, many times. Word was he had played rugby in his youth, and though he was in his 50s now and his belly strained the buttons of the gray pinstripe suit coat that he wore over a white shirt and a red tie, he still had the broad shoulders and barrel chest that spoke of many years of exertion. His face was round, he had closely cut yellow-brown hair and hazel eyes, and the lines around his mouth suggested a man who liked to smile and laugh. When I stepped in, he rose from the chair he was sitting in, one of those surrounding the round table, and placed the book he had been reading down atop the table. "Suresh," he said, extending his hand to me, "nice to see you again." I knew from experience that his grip was beyond firm. Every time I shook hands with him, I had to thrust my hand as deeply into his as possible, or my fingers would be crushed to the point of breaking. I did the same this time, inwardly bracing myself against the pain in case I didn't go far enough before he began to squeeze. "Mr. Carpenter," I said simply, and squeezed as the vice grip came down around my fingers. I didn't let my relief show when I realized I had indeed pushed far enough. But I could see from the amused twinkle in Carpenter's eyes that he knew what I was thinking. Still, he had the grace not to say it. He just released my hand and gestured toward the other chair at the table. As I settled down into the proffered chair, he spoke again. "So you're here on behalf of Mr. Ramsey," he said, shaking his head. "Wish I could say I wasn't upset with him." "Yes, well," I said, and leaned forward toward him as he also sat. "You have reason. I'm here to see if we can work out an arrangement." "I don't see what's to work out. He raised a lot of money with his fundraiser. He needs to pay what he owes." That was true enough. But I don't disagree, but there's more to the situation that makes things complicated. Carpenter raised an eyebrow, and I laid it out for him. When I had finished, he leaned back in his chair and blew out a long, exasperated breath. "You have got to be kidding me." I shook my head. "I wish I was." "So you mean to tell me that not only does he not have enough money to pay me, he doesn't have enough to finish his recording?" I nodded. Carpenter looked away toward the plasteel wall that looked out into the universe. "Son of a bitch," he said. He paused for a second, then looked back at me. "You know I backed his fundraiser? At the highest level." I blinked, utter surprise forcing me to silence for several seconds as I processed what Carpenter had said. I flashed back to the days when Jason had been running his fundraiser. The highest tier had been for 500, which meant he owed you 4,000, and you gave him 500 more in the fundraiser? Carpenter nodded. You didn't add it to his debt, just gave it? He nodded again. Why? Carpenter shrugged. What can I say? The man plays a mean keyboard, and he's got a great voice. No argument there, except it was another indictment against Jason, because if he had realized that Carpenter had given him $500 in the fundraiser, surely that would have cued something in his head to question what was going on with the debt he owed. But then again, I had already established that Jason wasn't so smart, so I shook my head, one thing at a time. Can we agree we would both rather see him finishing his album and getting it out to the world earning money than see him try to breathe vacuum? Carpenter raised an eyebrow at my forthright statement, but he nodded. He had a distinctly curious expression on his face. So how about this? You front him the rest of the money to finish producing the album, and to make good on the rewards to his backers. Carpenter opened his mouth to object, no doubt, but I held up a hand before he could say anything. Hear me out. He shut his mouth, though he did not look happy. You manage him while it's being finished. Make sure he keeps on the straight and narrow. Then, when it comes out, you get the proceeds, both revenue from royalties and from concerts, until his debt is paid, plus, let's say, 20%. I raised an eyebrow. Simple interest. Carpenter snorted, but he made a gesture that said, keep going. After that, you get 40% for the life of the album. Carpenter sat silently for half a minute, pondering. Then he shook his head. That's a lot of risk to take on my shoulders. For all you and I know, the album might not earn anything beyond what it already has. Then Jason works for you until his debt's paid with interest. I raised an eyebrow. Simple interest, I said again, and again Carpenter snorted. I continued, but I think neither of us believes it won't do well. If you add a little bit more funding for marketing and the surrounding systems, it might just catch on big, and then... I left the rest unsaid, but spread my hands and raised my eyebrows at him. The corners of Carpenter's mouth were beginning to turn upward slightly. That's more money out of my pocket, Suresh. I'll need more of a cut on the back end. How much more? 80%. I shook my head. 50. 70. 60. 65. I hesitated, then nodded. Done. Carpenter leaned back in his chair and inhaled, then let out a long, slow sigh. This could turn out to be a good thing, he said. I run Jason's musical career, get most of the proceeds. He raised an eyebrow. This goes well. I might open up my own label, I shook my head. Nah, this is just for this one album. After that, he's on his own. Carpenter's satisfied expression dropped a bit. Not sure I like that. He's not exactly a reliable man. Once I've made the investment to get him off the ground, I don't want him screwing it up in later efforts. That's between you and him. Later. If he wants to sign on with you again in the future, fine, but for this deal, I'm not committing him to anything further. What, you don't trust me? I didn't answer, just looked at him. Truth was, I didn't trust him, and though Jason and I weren't friends, I had no intention of signing him into indentured servitude to this man. Paying him back and giving him a piece of the action for his trouble? Sure. Forcing Jason to work with him forever? Not a chance. After a few seconds, Carpenter shrugged. Fine, he's free to do what he wants after this first album, as long as I get paid back with interest first. I raised an eyebrow and chuckled. Simple interest, he added, sounding amused, but he held up his finger. If he starts to produce his second album before I get my money back, I get the same cut of the second. That seemed fair. I nodded. Agreed. Well, Carpenter said, and moved to stand. I suppose all's well that ends well. Not quite, I said, not moving. Carpenter paused, then settled back into his seat. He eyed me sideways. What else is there? My cut, I said. His eyebrows rose. He's not my friend, I said. I'm only doing this because I don't want to see him spaced, and I like his music. I think I should get a finder's fee. Carpenter's lips turned downward slightly. How much? 10%. So I only get 55. There was the beginnings of anger growing there, and I hurried to clarify before that anger began to blaze. No, you get your 65. My 10% is on top of that. The anger fled, and Carpenter nodded in understanding. So 65 to me, 10 to you, and 25 to him? I nodded. But if it's all the same to you, I'd prefer he not know about my cut. Carpenter just looked at me for a moment, then said, so he thinks I'm getting 75, but in reality I'm kicking back 10 to you. And then in subsequent albums, if we continue working together? I shrugged. Like I said, that's between him and you. I don't want any part of it after that. If you two decide to keep working together, give him a 10% raise to sweeten the deal. Or keep the 75, doesn't matter to me. Carpenter burst out laughing. Then he held out his hand, and we shook. I didn't push far enough this time, and left feeling like my fingers had been broken. 75%? Jason's voice was higher pitched than normal, disbelief arguing with relief, and then with resistance as he responded to my summation of the negotiation with Carpenter. Sorry, man, I said as I unholstered my gun and slipped it into its clip beneath the desk, then settled back down into my chair. He was rather irritated with you. I tried to get him less, but I spread my hands helplessly. Best I could do. Jason nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess so. He looked away from me toward the vid screen, which he had turned to a sitcom while I was away. He wasn't really watching it, just looking at the flashing images as he thought for a second. Then he said, Still, it sucks he gets so much. I was thinking this would be my big break, you know? Yeah, well, it beats being a fugitive. Or sucking vacuum. Jason blanched and looked back at me. He nodded again, more quickly this time, that's for sure. He drew a deep breath, then rose. Thanks, man, I really appreciate the help. You're a real friend. I didn't let my skepticism show about that. We hadn't really been friends even before this incident, so I just made a vaguely dismissive wave of my hand. It's no big deal, just happy you'll get to produce your album. I paused, then added, and keep breathing. Jason shook his head. No, man, I mean it. You really saved my ass. He bit his lip, thinking for a second. Then he nodded to himself, coming to a decision of some sort. Look, I don't have much money, but how about you take 10% off of what I make from the album? I blinked. I hadn't truly expected he would make this kind of offer. But as long as he was, you're getting 25%, so you mean I get 10% and you get 15? Or I get 2.5% and you get 22.5? Jason looked askance at me, then he shook his head. 2%'s bull crap, you deserve more than that. Straight 10. So Carpenter gets 75, I get 10, and you get 15. That doesn't seem fair to you. Jason snorted. Like you said, without you, I wouldn't be getting anything. Spreading my hands, I leaned back in my chair and put on my deepest look of appreciation. Jason, I really don't know what to say. Don't say anything. You saved my ass, man. Thank you. He extended out his hand. We shook, and he left my office. As the door closed behind him, and the lock clacked back into place, I considered that this had turned out to be a pretty good day all around. On instinct, I opened up my invoicing program again, then swiped Mrs. Gorant's file open. Pretty sure she deserved a discount. This time.
Okay, so Suresh is a clever guy. Do we think he's a good guy? Kind of took advantage of his boy Jason. But at the same time, Jason's kind of a retard. I don't know. So when I wrote this, something was going on in the world of copyright, or maybe not. I don't even remember. It's been so long since I wrote it. But this is the sort of thing that happens in the arts, right? You have naive musicians, naive writers, naive painters, whatever, who get taken advantage of by people who understand the game better than they do. And unfortunately, it's the fact. And that's part of the reason why I'm doing my thing on my own instead of going to New York Publishing. But regardless, a little bit of an amusing tale. Not exactly, best morality play maybe, but I liked it. Hopefully you did too. So I'm not going to tell you what we're going to cover next week on Story Saturday because I'm really not sure. I got to do a bunch of zipping around the state here in the next week to take care of various business. So we'll probably be doing another Blast from the Past. I'll figure out which one, and you'll find out next week when we do it. But Story Saturday is back, and it's going to stay back, at least for the foreseeable future. So, hey, come back for that. On Tuesday, make sure you come to check out Glimmer Vale, the latest chapters from the Glimmer Vale, the first book in my Glimmer Vale series, which you can see up that way by my head. Oh, hard. Jeez, so hard to, I'm a private pilot. I've done a bunch of other things that require hand-eye coordination, but apparently I can't figure out a camera. Anyway, on Tuesday, come by for Glimmerville chapters. And we're going to be getting back into gaming and music stuff, things I used to do around here that I fell away from the last several months just because of busyness. But we are coming through the grommet on that, and we'll be getting back to a better routine around here. So definitely, if you like what we're doing with stories and want to see some of that other stuff, make sure you're subscribed and all that other stuff. Come over to me on Substack, michaelkingswood.substack.com. To check out the text versions of the stories that I'm putting up on a regular basis, and go buy some books. All right, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, Kingswood, I love that story. How can I buy your books? Great question. Here's the answer. Best way to buy my books is to come over to my site, michaelkingswood.com/store. That will bring you to this place, which is my company's store, where you can get books, merchandise, all kinds of great stuff that I've set up. And but you're wondering how it works. Well, here, let's check out Glimmervale Chronicles, which is my heroic fantasy series that I've talked a lot about. If you haven't read it yet, you really should. It's a super fun series. Everything you would want. You should start with Glimmervale, which is the first book. Come over here to Glimmervale. It'll load up. Hey, look at that. You get the book description, links to other books in the series, great stuff. And you can pick the format you want. You got ebook, trade paperback, and audiobook. Not everything I've written is an audiobook yet, but almost everything's a trade paperback and everything's an ebook. But like, hey, I know what you're thinking. Hey, I'm buying from you. How do I get the ebook? There's a service that I work with called BookFunnel. When you buy from my site, they will send you a link. That link will lead you to a page where they will walk you through how to load your ebook onto the device you're choosing, or you can just download it to computer and do whatever you want with it. So that way it's easy peasy. Maximum profit for me, all kinds of fun for you. But I know a lot of you guys, you like your Kindles, you like your other things, and you want to go straight to the retailer, and that's fine. You can come over here to michaelkingswood.com/books2read, the number 2. And I have this handy dandy universal BookLink aggregator page set up. You can scroll through, look at all my stories, all my books, and pick which one you want, and then go from there. Here's how it works. Let's do Glimmervale again. So Glimmervale, first book in the series, you click on it, you get this thing, you get the book description, you get all other books in the series, and you say, get it now. Okay, get it now. Look what happens. Every retailer where you can find it is here. You can pick the one that you like best and say, okay, cool. Well, let's say I wanted to buy it in, I don't know, let's just say Kobo, because why not? Click on it. And then it'll ask you, is this your favorite store? If so, you set it. So every time you come back, you don't have to choose. It'll just go take you to your favorite store. But let's just, you don't have to do that. Well, we're going on to Kobo. Booyah. Hey, look at this. Here it is on the Kobo site. People like it. People have bought it. Good stuff. Links to other things of mine. And, or you can do one of the other stores that you like. Either way, you get the book you like. I get money. It's all good.